There's a kind of power that doesn't come from wealth or weapons, but from the absolute certainty that no one can reach you, that your walls are too high, your heart too guarded to ever be breached. Natalia lived with that power. She wasn't feared for what she could do, but for what she refused to allow. A soul so carefully protected that it had become her greatest strength and her deepest prison, until a man walked into her gallery and saw in her something all the others had never been able to see: the woman behind the armor. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The gallery smelled of old canvas and fresh paint, a scent Natalia had learned to love because it was the only one that didn't demand anything from her. It was an honest smell, constant, safe. There, among the paintings hung on white walls under carefully positioned lights, and the sculptures placed with mathematical precision, she found the only place in the world where she could be exactly who she was, or rather where she could hide who she was. The evening light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating amber rectangles that stretched across the polished concrete floors. Natalia stood in front of a massive abstract piece, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She wore a black silk blouse tucked into tailored charcoal trousers, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Her heels clicked against the floor as she moved, each step deliberate, controlled. A woman who knew exactly how much space she occupied and refused to apologize for it. She was beautiful in a way that intimidated rather than invited. High cheekbones, full lips that rarely smiled, eyes the color of dark amber that seemed to look through people rather than at them. At 32, Natalia had built a reputation in the art world that preceded her: sharp, brilliant, untouchable. Collectors sought her opinion. Artists begged for her representation. Critics respected her judgment. But no one got close. No one was allowed. Because Natalia had learned early that closeness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain, and pain was something she'd sworn never to feel again. Her assistant Marco, a nervous young man with wire-rimmed glasses, approached cautiously. "Miss Volkov," he said softly, almost apologetically. "The Castellano collection viewing is tonight. They'll be here in an hour." Natalia didn't turn. "I know," she replied, her voice cool, measured. "Everything is prepared." Marco hesitated. "He's coming personally. Lorenzo Vitale." Now she turned, one eyebrow raised. "The man himself?" Marco nodded. "They say he never attends these events, that he sends representatives. But tonight, he insisted on coming. Something about wanting to meet the woman who called his taste pedestrian in last month's exhibition review." Natalia's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "I didn't call his taste pedestrian. I said his collection showed a fundamental misunderstanding of contemporary expressionism and a preference for spectacle over substance." Marco winced. "He's not someone you want to offend, Miss Volkov. He's, well, you know who he is." "Everyone knows who Lorenzo Vitale is," Natalia said, turning back to the painting. "That doesn't mean I need to pretend his money makes him an expert. But if he wants to come and be educated, I'm happy to oblige." What Marco didn't say, what everyone in the city knew but rarely spoke aloud, was that Lorenzo Vitale wasn't just a wealthy collector. He was the Castellano family patriarch, the man who controlled half the city's underground operations through a network so sophisticated that law enforcement could never quite prove anything. On paper, he was a successful businessman with interests in real estate, shipping, and hospitality. In reality, he was a king in a kingdom without borders, a man whose word was law in rooms where laws didn't apply. Natalia knew this, of course. She simply didn't care. In her world, art was power. Knowledge was power. Control was power. And she had spent years building walls so high that no amount of money or influence could scale them. She had been hurt once, destroyed really, by a man who promised her the world and delivered nothing but betrayal. That was 10 years ago, when she was young and foolish enough to believe in love, in trust, in the possibility of being truly known by another person. She had given everything, her heart, her body, her dreams, and he had taken it all and disappeared, leaving her broken on the floor of the life they were supposed to build together. From those broken pieces, Natalia had reconstructed herself into something harder, sharper, impenetrable. She became successful out of spite, brilliant out of necessity, and untouchable out of survival. Men tried, of course. They always tried. Wealthy collectors who offered her trips to Paris, dinners at exclusive restaurants, penthouse apartments with views of the river. Artists who painted her, wrote poems about her, declared their devotion in grand romantic gestures. Business partners who proposed mergers that were thinly veiled proposals of another kind. She rejected them all with the same cool politeness, the same practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Thank you, but no, I'm not interested. I'm focused on my work. I don't have time for complications. And she didn't. Her gallery was her life, her purpose, her fortress. Here, she was in control. Here, she decided what had value, what deserved attention, what would be remembered. Here, she was untouchable. The hour passed quickly. Marco fussed with the lighting, adjusted the placement of wine glasses on the sleek metal tables, checked and rechecked the guest list. Natalia stood in her office, a minimalist space with a glass desk and a single leather chair, looking at herself in the mirror on the back of the door. She adjusted her hair, smoothed invisible wrinkles from her blouse, applied a deep red lipstick with precise strokes. Armor, she thought. Every piece of clothing, every carefully chosen accessory, every controlled gesture was armor. The first guests arrived as the sun was setting, casting the gallery in a golden glow that made the art look even more dramatic. Natalia moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, offering insights, answering questions with just enough warmth to be professional and just enough distance to prevent familiarity. She was good at this, the performance of accessibility while maintaining absolute separation. Then he arrived. Natalia felt his presence before she saw him, a shift in the room's energy, a subtle change in the way people positioned themselves. Conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes darted toward the entrance. Even the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with something electric and dangerous. Lorenzo Vitale stood in the doorway, and Natalia understood immediately why people feared him. He was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled his perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was dark with silver at the temples, swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and hard lines. A strong jaw, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken once and healed slightly crooked. Lips that curved in a way that suggested he found the world perpetually amusing. But it was his eyes that struck her. Dark, almost black, intelligent and assessing. The eyes of a man who saw everything and revealed nothing. He looked at the room with the casual confidence of someone who owned it, who owned everything. And when his gaze found Natalia across the crowd, something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition, interest, challenge. She held his stare, refusing to look away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. Around them, people watched, sensing the tension, the unspoken confrontation. Lorenzo smiled, a slow, dangerous smile, and began walking toward her. He moved like a predator, graceful and purposeful, and people stepped aside without seeming to realize they were doing it, creating a path for him through the gallery. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "Miss Volkov," he said, his voice deep and rich with an accent that suggested old-world roots and new-world polish. "I'm Lorenzo Vitale. I believe you have some opinions about my taste in art." Natalia took his hand briefly, professionally, ignoring the way his touch seemed to carry heat. "Mr. Castellano," she replied, her voice cool. "Welcome to my gallery. I hope you're prepared to expand your understanding of contemporary expressionism." His smile widened. "I'm prepared to be educated," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Though I suspect the education I'll receive tonight has very little to do with art." She raised an eyebrow. "Then you've come to the wrong place. This is a gallery, not a classroom in whatever it is you think you're learning." "I'm here for the art, Miss Volkov," he said smoothly, "though I find the curator far more intriguing than the paintings." Natalia felt a flicker of irritation, the same irritation she felt whenever men tried to flirt instead of engaging with her professionally. "Flattery won't change my assessment of your collection," she said. "And if you're here to intimidate me into revising my review, you've wasted your evening." "Intimidate you?" Lorenzo laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "Miss Volkov, I don't think intimidation would work on you. I think you'd rather die than show fear. Am I wrong?" She studied him, trying to understand his angle, his strategy. "No," she admitted. "You're not wrong." "Good," he said. "Then we understand each other. I'm not here to intimidate you or flatter you or waste your time. I'm here because I read your review, and you were right." That admission caught her off guard, though she was careful not to show it. "You're admitting I was right?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "About your collection showing a fundamental misunderstanding of contemporary expressionism?" He nodded, still smiling. "My collection was assembled by consultants who told me what would appreciate in value. I bought pieces because they were good investments, not because I understood them or cared about them. Your review made me realize I've been a fool. So I'm here to learn, from you, if you're willing to teach me." Natalia searched his face for signs of mockery, for the joke she was certain was coming. But his expression remained open, genuine, almost humble. It was so unexpected from a man with his reputation that she found herself momentarily disarmed. "Why me?" she asked. "There are other experts, other galleries." "Because you're the only one who had the courage to tell me the truth," he replied. "Everyone else either praised my collection because they wanted my money or said nothing because they feared my reputation. You didn't care about either. You cared about the art. That's rare. That's valuable." She wanted to dismiss him, to send him away with the same polite rejection she'd perfected over the years. But something in his words resonated with her, the recognition of someone who valued truth over comfort, substance over spectacle. "Fine," she said finally. "Let's start with this piece." She turned toward the massive abstract painting she'd been studying earlier, and Lorenzo moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle, cedar and bergamot. The painting was a chaos of color, bold reds and deep blacks, violent brushstrokes that seemed to fight each other across the canvas. "What do you see?" Natalia asked. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, really looking. "I see anger," he said slowly. "Pain. Something trying to break free." She glanced at him, surprised. "That's better than most people manage on first viewing. They usually say it looks like someone spilled paint." He smiled slightly. "I'm familiar with things trying to break free," he said, and there was something in his voice, a depth she hadn't expected. "What else?" she prompted. "The colors," he continued. "They're not random. The red is concentrated here, in the center, like a wound, and the black surrounds it, contains it, or maybe tries to suffocate it. Natalia felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition she didn't want to acknowledge. "You understand it," she said quietly. "The piece is about suppression, about emotions that are too dangerous to express. So they're contained, controlled, hidden. But they bleed through anyway, because pain always finds a way out." Lorenzo turned to look at her, and his expression had changed. The playful challenge was gone, replaced by something more serious, more real. "Is that what you believe?" he asked. "That pain always finds a way out?" "It's not about belief," she replied, looking away from him back to the painting. "It's about observation. We can build all the walls we want, create all the control we need, but the things we're trying to contain are always there, always pushing, always bleeding through." They stood in silence for a moment, the conversation having moved somewhere neither of them had intended. Around them, the gallery continued its elegant buzz, guests moving from piece to piece, wine glasses clinking, polite laughter echoing off the high ceilings. But in their small space in front of the painting, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "Show me another," Lorenzo said finally. Natalia led him through the gallery, and despite her best efforts to maintain professional distance, she found herself engaging with him in a way she rarely engaged with anyone. He asked intelligent questions. He listened to her answers with genuine attention. He didn't try to impress her with knowledge he didn't have, but he also didn't pretend to understand less than he did. He was, she realized with some discomfort, exactly the kind of student she would have enjoyed teaching if he were anyone else. They stopped in front of a sculpture, a twisted metal figure that seemed to be reaching upward or collapsing downward. It was impossible to tell which. "This one makes me uncomfortable," Lorenzo admitted. "It should," Natalia replied. "That's the point. The artist is exploring the moment of transformation, the space between what we were and what we're becoming. It's painful. It's uncertain. We don't know if the figure is rising or falling, if the transformation is growth or destruction." He studied it for a long moment. "Maybe it's both," he said. "Maybe growth requires destruction. Maybe we have to fall apart to rise." She looked at him sharply. "That's a sophisticated reading." He met her gaze. "I'm a sophisticated man, Miss Volkov, despite what you might think based on my reputation." "I don't think about your reputation," she said, which was a lie, and they both knew it. His smile returned, that dangerous curve of his lips. "Liar," he said softly. "You've thought about me constantly since I walked through that door. You're trying to figure me out, categorize me, decide whether I'm a threat or an opportunity, or just another wealthy fool with more money than sense." She wanted to deny it, but something about the directness of his challenge made her answer honestly. "You're right," she admitted. "I've been trying to figure you out." "And have you succeeded?" "No," she said. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A brute," she said bluntly. "Someone who mistakes power for intelligence, money for taste, fear for respect. And instead? Instead, I'm talking to someone who actually looks at art and sees more than decoration. Someone who understands transformation and pain and the space between falling and rising. It's," she hesitated, "unexpected." Lorenzo moved slightly closer, and she felt her body tense instinctively, her defenses rising. "I make a career out of being unexpected," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "People see what they expect to see, what they've been told to see. But you, Miss Volkov, you don't trust what you're told. You trust what you observe. So observe me. Tell me what you see." She should have stepped back, should have ended this conversation and returned to her other guests. Instead, she found herself studying him the way she studied art, looking past the surface to find the truth underneath. "I see a man who has built an empire on control," she said slowly, "who has convinced everyone, including himself, that he's exactly what his reputation claims. But there's something underneath, something that responds to beauty, to truth, to the things that can't be controlled or bought or intimidated. I think that frightens you, more than your enemies, more than the law. The possibility that there's something inside you that you can't command." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with something electric. Lorenzo's expression had gone very still, his eyes locked on hers, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You see too much," he said finally. "Most people only see what I allow them to see. But you look deeper. That's dangerous, Miss Volkov, for both of us." "I'm not afraid of you," she replied, lifting her chin. "I'm not afraid of anyone." He smiled again, but this time there was no humor in it, only a dark promise. "You should be," he said, "because I'm not like the others. The men you've rejected, the ones you've kept at a distance with your perfect control and your perfect walls. I'm patient. I'm persistent. And I always get what I want." "And what do you want?" she challenged. He leaned in slightly, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You," he said simply. "I want you." Natalia felt her heart rate spike, felt her carefully maintained composure crack, just slightly. She forced herself to laugh, to make the sound light and dismissive. "I'm afraid you'll be disappointed," she said. "I'm not available. Not to you. Not to anyone. I'm untouchable, Mr. Castellano." Lorenzo's smile turned predatory, dangerous, absolutely confident. "We'll see about that tonight," he murmured. "We'll see about that." Before she could respond, before she could put him in his place with the cutting words already forming in her mind, Marco appeared at her elbow, apologetic but insistent. "Miss Volkov, there's a client who wants to discuss a potential acquisition. She needs to speak with you immediately." Natalia welcomed the interruption, needed the escape. "If you'll excuse me," she said to Lorenzo, her voice cool again, professional again, the wall slamming back into place. "Business calls." "Of course," he replied, stepping back, but not before his hand brushed against hers. A touch so brief it might have been accidental, but felt entirely deliberate. "We'll continue this conversation later." Natalia spent the next hour deliberately avoiding Lorenzo Vitale. She moved through the gallery with renewed focus, speaking with clients, discussing pieces, negotiating prices with the careful precision that had made her reputation. But she was aware of him constantly, a dark presence at the edge of her vision, watching her with those intelligent, assessing eyes. Every time she glanced in his direction, he was looking at her, and he didn't look away when their eyes met. He held her gaze with a confidence that was both infuriating and, though she hated to admit it, compelling. The gallery event ended just after 10. Guests filtered out slowly, reluctant to leave the elegant space and return to the ordinary world outside. Natalia stood by the door, thanking people for coming, accepting compliments on the exhibition with practiced grace. Lorenzo was one of the last to leave. He approached her with that same predatory walk, that same dangerous smile. "Thank you for the education, Miss Volkov," he said. "It was illuminating." "I'm glad you found it worthwhile," she replied formally. "Perhaps you'll think more carefully about your acquisitions in the future." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to her. "I'd like to continue our conversation," he said. "Perhaps over dinner. I could use further guidance on my collection." Natalia didn't take the card. "I don't socialize with clients, Mr. Castellano," she said. "It blurs professional boundaries." "I'm not a client," he replied. "I didn't purchase anything tonight." "Then you're not anything to me," she said, her voice sharp. And I have no interest in dinner, or guidance, or whatever it is you're actually proposing." Lorenzo studied her for a moment, then tucked the card back into his jacket. "You're afraid," he said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "I'm not afraid of you." "No," he agreed. "You're afraid of yourself, of what you might feel if you let those walls down for even a moment. Of what you might want if you allowed yourself to want anything. I know that fear, Miss Volkoff. I live with it every day. The difference between us is that I've learned to face it. You're still running. That struck too close, cut too deep." Natalia felt her composure crack, felt anger surge through her carefully maintained control. "Get out," she said, her voice low and hard. "You know nothing about me, about my life, about what I've faced, or what I've survived. Take your amateur psychology and your predatory interest, and leave my gallery." Lorenzo didn't move, didn't react to her anger with anger of his own. Instead, his expression softened slightly, something almost like understanding crossing his face. "I'll go," he said. "But before I do, let me tell you something. I didn't come here tonight to seduce you, or intimidate you, or play games. I came because I read your words, your passion for truth and beauty and substance, and I recognized something in them. Something of myself. We're the same, you and I. We've both built fortresses to protect ourselves. We've both convinced ourselves that isolation is strength. But I think we're both wrong. I think we're both just lonely." With that, he turned and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her one last time. "When you're ready to stop running," he said, "you know where to find me." Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving Natalia standing alone in her gallery, surrounded by beautiful things, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, her perfectly constructed armor cracked just enough to let in the smallest sliver of doubt. She locked the door behind him and leaned against it, closing her eyes, trying to calm the storm of emotions churning inside her chest. Anger, confusion, fear. And underneath it all, buried so deep she almost didn't recognize it, something else. Curiosity, interest, want. No, she told herself firmly. No, she wouldn't allow it, couldn't allow it. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let some arrogant man with pretty words and dangerous eyes break through her defenses. She was untouchable. That was her strength. That was her survival. But as she walked through the empty gallery, turning off lights, adjusting paintings that didn't need adjusting, she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, about loneliness, about fortresses, about the fear that lived underneath her control. And she couldn't stop remembering the way his eyes had looked when she'd talked about pain finding a way out, about transformation requiring destruction, about the space between falling and rising. He had understood, not just the art, but her. The real her that lived behind the walls. And that terrified her more than anything. That night, alone in her apartment, a minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Natalia stood looking out at the lights spread below her. Her apartment was as controlled as her gallery, everything in its place. Nothing unnecessary, nothing that couldn't be explained or categorized or contained. She poured herself a glass of wine and tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. She tried to work, reviewing proposals from artists seeking representation, but she couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to the gallery, to the conversation, to the way Lorenzo had looked at her like he could see straight through every defense she'd carefully constructed. She thought about what he'd said about loneliness. Was she lonely? She had her work, she had her reputation, she had the respect of her peers and the admiration of her clients. She had built exactly the life she'd designed after the devastation 10 years ago. A life where no one could hurt her, because no one could reach her. But was it enough? The question bothered her because she'd never allowed herself to ask it before. Enough was a dangerous word. It implied that there might be more, that there might be something she was missing, something she was denying herself. And if she started questioning whether her life was enough, then she'd have to face the possibility that she'd built her fortress on the wrong foundation, that she'd spent 10 years protecting herself from a threat that maybe, just maybe, wasn't as dangerous as the isolation itself. She finished her wine and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the city filtering through her windows, feeling the emptiness of the large bed, the silence of the apartment. Lorenzo was right, she realized. She was lonely, desperately, achingly lonely. But acknowledging it changed nothing, because loneliness was safer than vulnerability. Isolation was safer than trust. And control was the only thing standing between her and the kind of destruction she'd barely survived once before. She wouldn't risk it again. She couldn't. No matter how compelling his words, no matter how much his understanding had resonated with something deep inside her that she'd tried so hard to forget existed. 3 days passed. Natalia threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, as if staying busy would prevent her from thinking about him. She reviewed new submissions from artists, met with potential buyers, planned the next exhibition. She was professional, focused, completely in control. But Lorenzo Vitale had gotten under her skin in a way she couldn't quite shake. She found herself thinking about their conversation at odd moments, remembering the way he'd looked at the art with genuine interest, the way he'd understood the pain in the abstract painting, the transformation in the sculpture, the way he'd seen through her armor to the fear underneath. It was infuriating. It was unsettling. And it was, she had to admit, also compelling. On the 4th day, a delivery arrived at the gallery. Marco signed for it and brought the large, flat package to her office, confusion on his face. "It's addressed to you personally," he said. From Lorenzo Vitale. Natalia's pulse quickened, though she kept her expression neutral. She dismissed Marco and carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a painting, not a famous work or an expensive piece meant to impress. It was something simple, intimate, a small watercolor of a bird in a cage, the door open, the bird still inside, as if afraid to leave. Tucked into the frame was a note in bold, confident handwriting. "You said pain always finds a way out. But what about fear? Does fear find a way out, or does it just build stronger cages? I've been thinking about what you said, about transformation requiring destruction, about the space between falling and rising. Maybe the bird stays in the cage, not because it can't leave, but because freedom is more terrifying than confinement. Maybe we all do that. I'd like to discuss this with you, not as a collector seeking guidance, as someone who recognizes a kindred spirit, someone who understands what it costs to stay safe. Dinner. Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. I'll send a car. And before you refuse, know that I'm not trying to conquer you, or possess you, or break down your walls. I'm simply asking to share a meal and a conversation with someone who sees the world the way I do. Someone who might understand what it's like to live in a fortress of your own making. The choice is yours. It always will be. D. Natalia read the note 3 times, her hands trembling slightly. The painting was perfect, uncomfortably perfect, a mirror held up to her own life. The open cage, the bird too afraid to fly. Was that what she was? Was that how he saw her? She wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to send the painting back with a polite but firm decline, to maintain her boundaries, her control, her safety. But something in his words had reached her. The acknowledgement that this wasn't about conquest, that he understood what it cost to stay safe, that he recognized her fear not as weakness, but as something he shared. For the first time in 10 years, someone had looked at her fortress and instead of trying to tear it down, had simply asked if she wanted to open the door. The choice is yours. It always will be. She stood in her office for a long time, looking at the painting, reading the note again, feeling the careful structure of her life beginning to shift, like tectonic plates moving deep underground, invisible on the surface, but capable of reshaping everything. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed the number on his business card, the one she'd told herself she'd thrown away but had actually kept in her desk drawer. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Volkov," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I was hoping you'd call." "The painting," she said, ignoring the flutter in her chest at the sound of his voice. "It's manipulative." "Incredibly so," he agreed. "Did it work?" She closed her eyes, took a breath. 8 o'clock tomorrow, she said. "Where?" "I'll send a car to your gallery at 7:30, he replied. "And Natalia, wear something that makes you feel powerful. Not for me. For you." She hung up without responding, her heart racing. What was she doing? This was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake. But even as she told herself that, even as she catalogued all the reasons this was dangerous and foolish and exactly what she'd sworn never to do again, she also felt something else. Anticipation, excitement, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe, just maybe, the cage door had been open all along, and she'd finally found the courage to notice. The next evening, Natalia stood in front of her closet for far too long, trying to decide what to wear. She'd told herself this didn't matter, that it was just dinner, just conversation, nothing more. But her hands moved through her wardrobe with unusual hesitation, rejecting pieces she normally loved, seeking something she couldn't quite name. Finally, she chose a deep burgundy dress, simple in design but elegant in execution. It had a high neckline and long sleeves, armor of a different kind, but it fit her like it had been made for her body, emphasizing her curves while maintaining an air of sophistication and control. She left her hair down, a small rebellion against her usual severe bun, dark waves falling past her shoulders. Minimal jewelry, heels that added 3 inches to her height. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a mixture of fear and defiance and curiosity. The car arrived exactly at 7:30. It was a black town car, elegant but not ostentatious, driven by a quiet man in a suit who opened the door for her without speaking. They drove through the city as evening settled into night, lights beginning to glow in windows and storefronts. Natalia watched the familiar streets pass by, trying to calm her nerves, reminding herself that she was in control, that she could leave at any time, that this was her choice. The car pulled up in front of a building she recognized, one of the oldest in the city, a historic landmark that had been converted into luxury apartments years ago. The driver opened her door and gestured toward the entrance. "Mr. Castellano is expecting you. Penthouse level." Her heart hammered as she rode the elevator up, watching the floor numbers climb. The doors opened directly into an apartment, and she stepped into a space that took her breath away. It wasn't what she'd expected. She'd imagined something ostentatious, all marble and gold, and obvious displays of wealth. Instead, the apartment was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls, original wood beams, and furniture that looked comfortable rather than expensive. The space was filled with art, real art, pieces that had clearly been chosen with care and genuine appreciation rather than investment value. And books, everywhere books, lining the walls, stacked on tables, creating a lived-in, feeling that was completely at odds with his reputation. Lorenzo emerged from what she assumed was the kitchen, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. No tie, no jacket, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "You came," he said, and there was genuine pleasure in his voice. "I wasn't certain you would. I wasn't certain I would either," she admitted. He smiled. "That makes this even more meaningful. Come, dinner is almost ready." "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "You sound shocked," he said, leading her toward the kitchen. "Did you think I just intimidated people into making my meals?" "I thought you had staff," she replied. "I do," he said, "but I sent them away tonight. I wanted privacy, and I wanted to cook for you myself. There's something honest about sharing food you've prepared with your own hands." The kitchen was open to the living area, separated by a large island with bar stools. Natalia sat while Lorenzo moved around the space with surprising ease, stirring something that smelled incredible, checking the oven, pouring wine into 2 glasses. He handed her one and raised his own. "To open doors," he said, "and the courage to walk through them." She touched her glass to his, taking a sip of what was undoubtedly an excellent vintage. "Your apartment isn't what I expected," she said, looking around. "What did you expect?" Lorenzo asked, returning to the stove. "Something colder, more impressive." "Less," she gestured around them, "lived in." He laughed. "You thought I'd have a penthouse that looked like a showroom, all glass and chrome, and nothing that suggested an actual person lived there." "Yes," she admitted. "This is my real home," he said. "The place where I don't have to be Lorenzo Vitale, the man everyone fears or wants something from. Here, I'm just Lorenzo. A man who likes to cook, who reads too many books, who appreciates beauty in its honest forms." She watched him work, noticing the care he took with each movement, the attention to detail. It reminded her of the way he'd looked at the art in her gallery, with genuine interest and respect. "You're surprising," she said. "Good," he replied. "I'd hate to be predictable." Dinner was simple but perfectly executed. Pasta with a sauce he'd made from scratch. A salad with ingredients he said came from a farmer's market he visited every Saturday. Bread that was still warm from the oven. They ate at a small table by the windows, the city spread out below them like a carpet of lights. The conversation flowed more easily than she'd expected. They talked about art, about books, about music. He told her about growing up in a family where power was everything, but beauty was dismissed as weakness, about discovering art as a teenager and hiding his love for it because it didn't fit the image of who he was supposed to become. She found herself telling him about her childhood, about parents who'd encouraged her creativity, about falling in love with art as a language that could express what words couldn't. They didn't talk about his reputation or her walls. They talked like 2 people discovering they had more in common than they'd expected, enjoying each other's company without the weight of everything else. After dinner, Lorenzo led her to the living area, where a fire crackled in a fireplace she hadn't noticed earlier. They sat on a comfortable couch, not too close, but not as far apart as strangers, the wine making her feel warm and relaxed. "Why did you really invite me here?" Natalia asked, the question that had been nagging at her all evening. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire. "Because when I met you," he said slowly, "I saw something I'd thought I was alone in feeling. This sense that the world requires us to be something we're not. That safety means building walls so high that nothing can get in, including the things we actually want. You stand in your gallery surrounded by beauty, but you don't let yourself be touched by it. You analyze it, categorize it, control it, but you don't let it move you. I do the same thing. I've built this empire, this reputation, this life that keeps everyone at exactly the right distance. And I'm so tired, Natalia. I'm so tired of being alone in a crowd, of being powerful and respected and completely isolated. His honesty disarmed her completely. She'd expected seduction, strategy, the careful manipulation of a man used to getting what he wanted. Instead, he was simply being vulnerable, showing her his own cage, his own fear of flying. "I don't know how to be any other way," she said quietly. "After what happened, after how completely I was destroyed, I had to rebuild myself into something harder, something that couldn't be broken again. And it worked. I'm successful. I'm respected. I'm safe. But you're not happy," Lorenzo said gently. She wanted to deny it, to defend her choices, to insist that happiness was overrated compared to security. But sitting here, in this warm space with this complicated man, who somehow understood her in ways no one else had, she couldn't lie. "No," she admitted. "I'm not happy. I'm just not destroyed." And for a long time, that was enough. Lorenzo reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm, his grip gentle but firm. What if there was a third option, he asked, not destroyed, and not just surviving, but actually living, actually feeling? What if we could find a way to lower the walls without losing ourselves completely? What if we could be both strong and open at the same time? She looked at their joined hands, feeling the heat of his skin against hers, the strange comfort of being touched without feeling threatened. "I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore," she whispered. "Maybe you are," he said. "Maybe we both are. Maybe that's why we found each other." The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence between them. Natalia felt something shifting inside her, like the bird in the painting finally noticing that the cage door had been open all along, that the only thing keeping it trapped was its own fear. "I'm afraid," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "I'm afraid that if I let you in, if I let anyone in, I'll lose myself again. I'll become someone I'm not. I'll give away pieces of myself until there's nothing left." Lorenzo squeezed her hand gently. "That's not what I'm asking for," he said. "I don't want you to change. I don't want you to give me anything. I just want to know you. The real you. Not the curator, not the expert, not the untouchable woman who's built a fortress around her heart. Just Natalia." No one had said her name like that in years. Not as a title or a formality, but as an invitation to be seen, to be known. She felt tears sting her eyes and blinked them back angrily. "I don't cry," she said. "You don't let yourself cry," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the same fear reflected in his eyes, the same longing, the same desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to connect without being destroyed. He was taking a risk too, she realized. This wasn't just about her walls. He had his own fortress, his own reasons for keeping people at a distance. And yet here he was, extending his hand, asking her to take a chance. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned her body toward him, just slightly, a small movement that felt enormous. "Tell me about your fortress," she said. "Tell me what you're protecting." Lorenzo's expression grew serious, shadows crossing his face. "My family's business," he said carefully, "isn't clean. You know that. Everyone knows that. I inherited something I didn't ask for, a legacy of violence and power and compromise. I was 23 when my father died, too young to refuse, too desperate to prove myself to question whether I wanted any of it. So I took control. I became what everyone expected me to become. I made the hard decisions. I built the empire. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself completely." He paused, his thumb moving absently across her knuckles. I convinced myself that isolation was strength, that if I kept everyone at arm's length, I couldn't be manipulated, or betrayed, or hurt. I had relationships, if you can call them that. Women who wanted my money, or my power, or the thrill of being with someone dangerous. But I never let them close. Never let them see the man who still loves art and literature, and all the things that make life beautiful instead of just profitable. I became my reputation, and it was killing me, slowly, from the inside out. That's why your review meant something, because you saw through the collection to the emptiness behind it. You called me out without knowing you were doing it, and it woke something up in me that I'd thought was dead. Natalia felt her throat tighten. I did the same thing, she said. I became my reputation, the untouchable curator. The woman who couldn't be bought or intimidated or seduced. I thought that made me strong. I thought that made me safe. But really, I was just afraid. Terrified that if I let someone in, I'd discover I was still that broken girl on the floor, still that person who could be destroyed by love. So I made sure no one could get close enough to hurt me. And in doing that, I made sure no one could get close enough to see me either. They sat in silence for a moment, holding hands, two people who'd built their entire adult lives around avoiding exactly this moment, this vulnerability, this terrifying honesty. "What happened to you?" Lorenzo asked gently. 10 years ago. What destroyed you so completely that you've spent a decade hiding? She'd never told anyone, not her friends, not her therapist during those dark months after, not even herself in the quiet moments when memory demanded acknowledgement. But something about this moment, this man, this shared understanding of what it cost to survive, made her want to speak the truth aloud. "His name was Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We met when I was 22, just starting in the art world. He was older, charming, successful, a gallery owner who promised to mentor me, to help me build my career. I fell in love completely, stupidly. I trusted him with everything, my dreams, my future, my body, my heart." She took a shaky breath. "For 2 years, we built a life together. Or I thought we were building a life. He was building an exit strategy. He used my connections, my insights, my reputation to expand his own gallery. He used my naivety to get information about competitors. And when he'd taken everything he needed, when he'd established himself using my work and my name, he disappeared. Took money I'd loaned him, pieces I'd helped him acquire, even artists I'd brought to him. Left me with debt and a destroyed reputation because people thought I'd been complicit in his schemes. I lost everything. My credibility, my savings, my ability to trust my own judgment." Lorenzo's grip on her hand tightened, and she felt his anger on her behalf, controlled but palpable. "What did you do?" She smiled bitterly. "I rebuilt. I spent 5 years working twice as hard as anyone else to prove I wasn't who he'd made me look like. I learned to trust no one, to keep every relationship purely transactional, to never let emotion cloud professional judgment. I turned myself into stone, Lorenzo. Cold, hard, impenetrable stone. And it worked. I survived. I succeeded. But I stopped living." Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm not him." "I know," she whispered. "That's what terrifies me. Because if you were, I could dismiss you easily. But you're not. You're real. And that means the risk is real too." He lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. "I have no intention of hurting you," he said. "But I can't promise you won't get hurt. That's the nature of connection, isn't it? The possibility of pain is the price we pay for the possibility of something real. I can't guarantee where this goes or what it becomes. but I can promise you honesty. I can promise you respect. And I can promise you that if you choose to take this risk with me, I'll take it with you. I'll be just as vulnerable, just as open, just as terrified. Natalia looked at him, this powerful man who'd admitted his own loneliness, his own fear, his own desperate hope for something beyond the fortresses they'd built. She thought about the painting he'd sent, the bird in the cage with the open door. She thought about transformation, about the space between falling and rising, about whether it was possible to grow without being destroyed. And then, surprising herself completely, she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't a dramatic kiss, not passionate, or desperate, or overwhelming. It was gentle, tentative, a question asked without words. Lorenzo responded with matching gentleness, his free hand coming up to cup her face, his lips moving against hers, with a tenderness that made her want to cry. The kiss lasted only a moment, but when she pulled back, everything had changed. The walls hadn't crumbled, the fortress hadn't fallen, but a door had opened, just a crack, just enough to let in a sliver of light, a breath of air, a whisper of possibility. "I'm still afraid," she said. "So am I," he replied. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe fear doesn't have to mean no. Maybe it just means we go slowly, carefully, with our eyes open." She nodded, and he pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, letting her rest her head against his chest. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, feeling the steady rhythm of each other's breathing, neither speaking because words felt unnecessary. Natalia left Lorenzo's apartment just before midnight, her mind spinning, her carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. He'd called her a car, had walked her down to wait with her, had kissed her goodnight with the same gentle tenderness that had characterized the entire evening. No pressure, no demands, just a soft brush of lips and a whispered, "I'd like to see you again, when you're ready." She'd nodded, unable to form words, and escaped into the safety of the car. But safety felt different now, less like protection and more like another cage. The next few days were strange. Natalia tried to return to her normal routine, to lose herself in work the way she always did. But she found herself distracted, her mind wandering to the evening in his apartment, to the conversation, to the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and rare. He didn't push, didn't show up at her gallery or flood her with messages or try to force his way back into her space. Instead, he sent small things. A book he thought she'd enjoy, with a note about a passage that had reminded him of their conversation. A photograph of a painting he'd seen in a private collection asking her opinion. A simple text message that said, "I'm thinking of you. Hope you're having a good day." Each gesture was careful, respectful of her boundaries, while gently reminding her that he was there, waiting, hoping. She tried to resist, tried to convince herself that opening up had been a mistake, that she should return to the safety of her isolation. But she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, about the possibility of being both strong and open, about living instead of just surviving. And slowly, gradually, she found herself responding. A message about the book, an analysis of the painting, a simple thank you that felt like so much more. They fell into a pattern of communication that felt safe but intimate, sharing thoughts and observations without the pressure of physical presence. He told her about a difficult business meeting, about the compromises required to maintain power in his world. She told him about an artist she was considering representing, about the vulnerability required to create something beautiful. 2 weeks after their dinner, he invited her to a private showing at a museum. "It's after hours," his message read. "Just us and the art. No pressure, no expectations. just an opportunity to share something beautiful with someone who might appreciate it the way I do. She surprised herself by accepting. The museum was empty when she arrived, only security guards posted discreetly at the exits. Lorenzo met her at the entrance, looking elegant in a dark suit, his expression lighting up when he saw her. "You came," he said, and she heard the relief in his voice, the fear that she might have changed her mind. "I came," she confirmed. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked through the galleries slowly, stopping in front of pieces that caught their attention. He asked her questions, listened to her answers with genuine interest, shared his own observations with a humility that suggested he valued her expertise, but wasn't afraid to have his own opinions. They stood for a long time in front of a Renaissance painting of a woman looking out a window, her expression contemplative and sad. "She looks trapped," Lorenzo said, "not by the window, but by whatever thoughts are keeping her there." Natalia studied the painting, feeling a strange kinship with the woman. "Maybe she's not trapped," she said. "Maybe she's choosing to stay, choosing to look out at the world rather than join it." "There's a difference. Is there?" Lorenzo asked. "Or is that just what we tell ourselves when we're too afraid to walk through the door?" She looked at him. "You're very persistent in your metaphors," he smiled. "I've always found that art reveals truth better than direct questions. We can be honest about paintings in ways we can't be honest about ourselves. Until we realize we're talking about ourselves all along," she said. "Until that," he agreed. They moved through the museum, their conversation flowing easily now, the tension that had characterized their first meeting replaced by something more comfortable, but no less charged. When they reached the modern art section, Natalia stopped in front of a piece that made her breath catch. It was an abstract work, bold reds and deep blacks, violent brushstrokes that seemed to fight each other across the canvas. It looked remarkably similar to the piece in her gallery, the one she'd discussed with Lorenzo that first night. "This is by the same artist," Lorenzo said quietly, moving to stand beside her. "I've been researching her work since that night, trying to understand what you saw in the piece at your gallery, what you saw in general." Natalia felt something warm bloom in her chest. "You've been studying her?" He nodded. "I've been studying a lot of things, trying to see the world the way you see it, trying to understand why beauty matters, why art matters, why allowing ourselves to be moved by something matters." She looked at him, this powerful man who'd spent weeks trying to see through her eyes, trying to understand the things she valued. "Why?" she asked. "Why does this matter so much to you?" "Because you matter to me," he said simply. "And the things that matter to you matter to me. That's how this works, isn't it? When you care about someone, you try to understand their world. You try to see what they see, feel what they feel." No one had ever done that for her before. Michael had pretended to care about her interests, while really just using them for his own advantage. Other men had dismissed her passion for art as a charming hobby. But Lorenzo was genuinely trying to understand, not to manipulate or impress her, but simply because he wanted to know her completely. That realization cracked something open inside her, some last defensive wall she'd been holding on to. She turned to face him fully, her heart pounding. "I'm terrified," she said. "Of you. Of this. Of what it might mean if I let you in completely." He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know," he said. "But Natalia, you're already in. You've been in since that first night when you looked at me like I was a puzzle to solve, rather than a reputation to avoid. You're in my head, in my heart, in every thought I have about what I want my life to look like. So the question isn't whether to let me in. The question is whether you're brave enough to let yourself feel what you're already feeling." She stared at him, her breath coming faster, her defenses crumbling like sand castles against a tide. And then she was kissing him, not gently this time, but with all the pent-up fear and longing and desperate hope that had been building inside her for weeks. He responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close, kissing her back with a passion that matched her own. They stood in the empty museum surrounded by centuries of art, by humanity's attempts to capture and express and preserve the things that moved them, and they created their own moment of beauty, raw and real and terrifying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Natalia rested her forehead against his chest. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be in a relationship without losing myself." "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, his lips against her hair. "We'll go slowly. We'll be honest. We'll make mistakes and forgive them. We'll be scared and do it anyway. But we'll do it together. Is that enough?" She looked up at him. "It has to be," she said, "because I can't keep living in that cage. I can't keep pretending that safety is the same as happiness. I want more. I want this. I want you, even if it terrifies me, especially because it terrifies me." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Natalia had expected the relationship to be overwhelming, to demand pieces of herself she wasn't ready to give. Instead, Lorenzo moved at her pace, respecting her need for control, while gently encouraging her to let go just a little more each day. They fell into a rhythm that felt natural, despite being completely new to both of them. He came to her gallery sometimes after closing, and they'd walk through the space together, talking about the pieces, about the artists, about the strange alchemy that turned paint on canvas into something that could move the soul. She visited his apartment for dinner, and he taught her to cook, laughing when she approached recipes with the same analytical precision she brought to art curation. They went to concerts, exhibitions, quiet dinners at restaurants where they could talk for hours, and slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Natalia discovered that beneath the reputation, Lorenzo was unexpectedly thoughtful. He remembered small details she mentioned in passing, her favorite tea, the author she'd been meaning to read, the vintage of wine she'd enjoyed. He noticed when she was stressed and knew when to offer comfort and when to give her space. He challenged her intellectually, disagreeing with her opinions about art or literature in ways that sparked passionate debates rather than defensive arguments. He made her laugh, something she'd forgotten she could do. He made her feel seen, not just as the curator or the expert or the untouchable woman, but as Natalia, complex and flawed and worthy of attention. And he was patient with her fears. When she panicked after their first truly intimate night together, overwhelmed by the vulnerability of it, by how much of herself she'd allowed him to see, he didn't push or demand reassurance. He simply held her, let her cry out years of suppressed emotion, and whispered that they had time, that there was no rush, that her pace was their pace. When she pulled away for a few days, needing to prove to herself that she still could, that she hadn't lost her independence completely, he let her go without complaint and welcomed her back without judgment. He seemed to understand that she needed to test the boundaries, to prove that opening her heart didn't mean losing her identity. For his part, Lorenzo revealed himself to her in careful layers. He told her about the violence in his world, not to shock her or test her, but because he wanted her to know the truth of who he was and what his life entailed. He talked about the moral compromises that kept him awake at night, the people he'd hurt in the name of power, the lines he'd crossed that he could never uncross. He showed her his guilt, his self-loathing, his desperate wish that he could be someone else entirely. And Natalia, who'd expected to be repelled by these revelations, instead found herself moved by his honesty. She didn't approve of his choices, but she understood them. She didn't excuse his past, but she recognized the man he was trying to become. They were both works in progress, she realized, both trying to figure out how to be authentic in a world that demanded masks. Both learning that strength wasn't about isolation, but about having the courage to be vulnerable with someone who wouldn't use that vulnerability as a weapon. 3 months into their relationship, Lorenzo took her to his family's estate outside the city. It was the first time he'd introduced her to that part of his life, and she could see the nervousness in his eyes, the fear that she'd see where he came from and realize she couldn't accept it. The estate was beautiful in a cold way, all marble and manicured lawns and security that was present, but not obvious. His mother was there, an elegant woman with sharp eyes, who assessed Natalia with the same calculating gaze her son had used that first night in the gallery. Over dinner, which was served by staff in a dining room that could have seated 30, his mother asked pointed questions about Natalia's background, her family, her gallery. It was an interrogation disguised as polite conversation, and Natalia recognized it for what it was: a woman protecting her son's position, his reputation, his carefully constructed life. She answered honestly but carefully, maintaining her composure even as she felt herself being evaluated and measured. When dinner ended, Lorenzo's mother walked her to the car, a ritual that felt significant. "You're different from the others," she said, her tone neutral. "The others were interested in power, in money, in what my son could give them. You're not, are you?" "No," Natalia replied. "I'm interested in who he is, not what he can provide." His mother studied her for a long moment. "He's changing," she said finally, "becoming someone I don't entirely recognize." Softer. More, she searched for the word. Present. "Is that your doing?" "I don't think I'm changing him," Natalia said. "I think I'm just giving him permission to be who he already is." The older woman's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. "Good," she said. "He spent too long being what everyone expects rather than what he wants. If you can help him find his way back to himself, then you have my blessing, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," Natalia assured her. On the drive back to the city, Lorenzo was quieter than usual. "My mother liked you," he said finally. "I could tell. She doesn't like anyone." "What did she say to you?" "That you're changing," Natalia replied. "That I'm helping you find your way back to yourself." He reached for her hand. "Is that what you're doing?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But you're doing the same for me, helping me remember that I'm more than just my defenses, that I can be vulnerable and still be strong, that love doesn't have to mean destruction." He brought her hand to his lips. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I haven't said it yet, that we agreed to go slowly, but I love you, Natalia. I love the way you see the world. I love your passion, and your strength, and your fear. I love that you're brave enough to let me in despite everything that's hurt you before. I love you, and I needed you to know that." Her eyes filled with tears, and this time she let them fall. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I could. I didn't think I had it in me anymore. But I do. I love you, Lorenzo. And it terrifies me, and thrills me, and makes me feel more alive than I've felt in 10 years. They spent the night at his apartment, making love with a tenderness that felt sacred, a physical expression of everything they'd admitted. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed, Natalia felt a peace she'd never known before. The walls hadn't disappeared, she realized. They were still there, but they'd been transformed from barriers into boundaries, from prisons into protection that she could choose to lower when she wanted, with someone who'd earned the right to see what was behind them. This was what she'd been afraid of, this feeling of completeness, of being known and accepted and loved not despite her flaws, but including them. She'd thought it would destroy her, would consume her identity until nothing remained. But instead, she felt more herself than ever, more whole, more real. Because Lorenzo didn't want her to be anyone other than who she was. He loved her walls and her defenses because he understood why she'd needed them. He loved her strength because he'd seen where it came from. He loved her completely, and in doing so, had given her permission to love herself completely too. 6 months after that first night in her gallery, Lorenzo proposed. Not with fanfare or grand gestures, but quietly, in the same museum where they'd kissed for the second time, standing in front of the abstract painting they both loved. "I know you value your independence," he said, holding a simple silver band with a single diamond. "I know you need your space, your gallery, your life that exists separately from me. I'm not asking you to give up any of that. I'm just asking if you'll let me build a life alongside yours. Not instead of, alongside. Two fortresses that choose to open their doors to each other. Two birds that have learned to fly. What do you say, Natalia? Will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, at this man who'd been patient enough to wait for her walls to come down brick by careful brick, who'd loved her through her fear and her resistance and her desperate need to protect herself. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, untouchable and lonely, convinced that isolation was strength. And she thought about the woman she was now, still strong, but no longer alone, still careful, but no longer closed, still scarred, but finally healing. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need you, but because I choose you. Because you've shown me that love doesn't have to mean losing myself. Because you've proven that some cages are meant to be opened, and some fears are meant to be faced, and some walls are meant to have doors. Yes, Lorenzo. Yes to all of it." He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, the museum held centuries of human expression, all the ways people had tried to capture love and loss and transformation and hope. And they added their own moment to that history. Two people who'd been broken and had rebuilt themselves into something harder, learning that maybe, just maybe, they could be soft again without shattering. The wedding was small, intimate, held not in a church or hotel ballroom, but in Natalia's gallery, surrounded by the art that had brought them together. Marco had helped her set up, moving pieces to create an aisle, bringing in flowers that complemented rather than competed with the paintings. Only close friends and family attended, people who understood that this wasn't just a marriage, but a transformation. Two people choosing to trust again, to love again, to believe that something beautiful could rise from the ruins of past pain. Natalia wore a simple white dress, elegant and modern, her hair down in soft waves. She carried a bouquet of white roses mixed with wildflowers, a contrast that felt appropriate, cultivation and wildness existing together. Lorenzo waited for her at the end of the aisle, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him, his eyes bright with emotion as she walked toward him. The vows they wrote were honest, acknowledging the fear they'd overcome, the walls they'd chosen to lower, the risks they were taking together. "I promise to respect your fortress," Lorenzo said, his voice rough with emotion. "To never demand more than you're ready to give. To love you in your strength and in your fear. To be the person you can always trust, even when trust feels impossible." "I promise to see you," Natalia replied, her own voice breaking slightly. "The real you, not the reputation. To accept the complicated parts and love them as much as the easy parts. To be brave enough to let you see me completely. To build a life where we can both be exactly who we are." When they kissed as husband and wife, The small crowd erupted in applause, but Natalia barely heard it. She was too focused on the man holding her, on the feeling of his arms around her, on the incredible reality that she'd taken the terrifying leap and hadn't been destroyed. She'd been transformed instead, made new, made whole. The reception was warm and joyful, with good food and better wine and speeches that made them laugh and cry. Lorenzo's mother approached Natalia at one point, pulling her into an unexpected embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing my son back to life, for showing him there was more to the world than power and control. You've given him something I could never give him, permission to be human." Later, as they danced together in the gallery, Lorenzo pulled Natalia close and whispered against her ear, "I used to think strength meant never needing anyone." She looked up at him, smiling. "And now?" "Now I know it means choosing to need someone anyway, choosing to take the risk despite the fear, choosing love even when it's terrifying." They spent their honeymoon not traveling the world, but in his apartment, in her apartment, in the gallery, in quiet restaurants and museums and parks. They spent it talking and making love and simply being together without the weight of uncertainty, without wondering if this was real or temporary or safe. They'd promised each other forever, and that promise felt like freedom rather than confinement. One afternoon, lying in bed with sunlight streaming through the windows, Natalia traced her fingers over Lorenzo's chest, following the lines and scars that told the story of his life. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Letting me in? Risking what we had before?" He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "The only thing I regret," he said seriously, "is the years I wasted being afraid. The time I lost because I thought isolation was the answer. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, it would be that the cage door was always open, that I was free to leave whenever I wanted. I just needed to find someone brave enough to fly with me." She smiled, feeling the truth of his words resonate in her chest. "We're both flying now," she said, "terrified and free and completely alive." "Yes," he agreed, pulling her close, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." Months turned into years, and their life together became something neither had imagined possible. Natalia's gallery continued to thrive, her reputation growing as she took more risks with unknown artists, trusting her instincts in ways she'd been too cautious to do before. Lorenzo gradually transformed his business, moving away from the darker aspects of his family's legacy and investing in legitimate enterprises, using his power and influence to create something positive rather than something feared. It wasn't easy, the transformation. There were setbacks and compromises and moments when they both questioned whether they'd made the right choices. But they faced those moments together, talking through their fears and doubts, supporting each other through the difficult periods, celebrating the victories no matter how small. They learned to fight, discovering that disagreement didn't mean destruction, that they could argue passionately and still love each other completely. They learned to give each other space when needed, understanding that time apart made time together more meaningful. They learned that marriage wasn't about becoming one person, but about being two people who chose each other every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. 5 years after their wedding, they stood in the same museum where he'd proposed, in front of the same abstract painting that had spoken to both of them. They came here sometimes when they needed to remember where they'd started, how far they'd come, what they'd overcome to build the life they now shared. "Look," Natalia said, pointing to the placard beneath the painting. They'd added a new description, one that included her analysis from years ago, about suppression and containment, about pain finding a way out. "Your words are immortalized," Lorenzo said, smiling. "Future generations will read your insights and understand the painting differently because of you. Just like I understand life differently because of you, she replied, leaning into him. You taught me that strength isn't about isolation. It's about connection. That walls can have doors, that cages can be opened, that fear doesn't have to win. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there in comfortable silence. Two people who'd spent years building fortresses and had finally found the courage to become each other's home instead. The painting in front of them still depicted chaos, violence, pain trying to break free. But they'd learned to see the beauty in it, the humanity, the truth that suffering acknowledged is suffering that can be transformed. They'd learned that lesson in their own lives, in their own hearts, and now they were teaching it to each other every day. Not through words, but through presence. Not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent choices to show up, to stay open, to love despite the risk. This was what redemption looked like, Natalia thought. Not fixing what was broken, but accepting that the broken pieces could form something new, something beautiful, something worth fighting for. She'd spent so many years believing she was untouchable, that her walls made her strong. But real strength, she'd discovered, came from allowing herself to be touched, to be known, to be loved completely. And in loving Lorenzo the same way, she'd found not destruction, but creation, not loss, but discovery, not an ending, but a beginning that continued to unfold with every choice they made to keep their doors open to each other. The sun was setting as they left the museum, casting the city in golden light. They walked hand in hand, through streets that had once felt like battlefields, but now felt like home. Because home wasn't a place, Natalia had learned. It wasn't about walls or fortresses or safety. Home was wherever she could be herself completely, wherever she was seen and accepted and loved, not despite her imperfections, but including them. Home was Lorenzo's hand in hers, his voice in her ear, his presence in her life. And that, she realized, was the greatest transformation of all, discovering that the untouchable woman she'd built herself into had been the cage all along, and the only key needed to unlock it had been her own willingness to try. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. And remember that we're never too broken to love, never too scarred to heal, never too afraid to take one more chance on the possibility that someone, somewhere, is brave enough to fly with us.